I took. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start with the payment to civil divisions of the state. Blah, blah, blah. Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee. I am Yashodhara Rai, and I'll be presenting the analysis for payments to civil divisions of the state. This portion of the budget is comprised of 3 items: disparity grants to low wealth jurisdictions based on a formula stated in the statute, grants to mitigate the impact of the local assumption of a portion of teacher retirement costs. These items are set in statute, gaming grants to Calvert County. As shown here on page 1, the fiscal 25 budget decreases by $41.9 million, of which $31.6 million decrease accounts for the disparity grant. Turning to page 2, the fiscal 24 working appropriation added 2 appropriations to miscellaneous grants, $10 million in general fund to Baltimore City and $250,000 in general fund to Kent County to increase the local contribution to Baltimore City Public Schools and Kent County Public Schools, respectively, above the fiscal 23 contribution. All amounts have been fully distributed. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows each county's various grant amounts in fiscal 25 allowance. The first column is the disparity grant. Second is the amount provided to local school boards to supplement their assumption of a portion of teacher retirement costs. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows the proposed budget change. Prince George's County receives the largest decrease in disparity grants by $29.2 million. Cecil County's disparity grant decreases by $1.1 million due to the county's change in local income tax rate from 2.8% to 2.75%, which results in no disparity grant allocation for the county in fiscal 25. The miscellaneous grants decreased by $10 million and $250,000 due to one-time addition in fiscal 24 working appropriation for Baltimore City Public Schools and Kent County Public Schools, respectively. Turning to page 5, the disparity grants are state funding targeted at the difference in counties' abilities in raising revenue from the local income tax. Counties with per capita local tax revenues less than 75% of the statewide per capita local tax revenue are eligible for grants in the amount of the difference between their revenue and 75% of the statewide average. There is a soft cap on the grant based on the county's 2010 grant amount and the county's tax rate. The cap can be increased based on the county's income tax rate. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the disparity grant calculation under the current law for fiscal 25. The tax rates for Anne Arundel County and Frederick County are marked with an asterisk starting because they adopted the graduated income tax bracket starting calendar year 2023, which is discussed in pages 7 through page 9. Turning to page 7, the chapter 23 of the 2021 special session requires all local governments to impose a minimum tax rate of 2.25% and a rate up to 3.2%. It also authorizes the local governments to impose county income tax rate on a bracket basis and who must, 1, set the income tax brackets that apply to each income tax rate by ordinance or resolution, and 2, notify the comptroller of a rate or income tax bracket change by July 1st prior to the year in which a new tax bracket is established. Since the enactment of this chapter, Anne Arundel and Frederick counties have adopted the bracket-based income tax rates beginning tax year 2023. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the bracket-based income tax rates for these 2 counties beginning tax year 23. This ranges from 2.7% to 2.81% for Anne Arundel and from 2.75% to 2.96% for Frederick County. Also starting tax year 2024, these 2 counties have modified their income tax bracket rates to incorporate a 3.2% income tax rate for high earners. Exhibit 5 on page 8 shows the modified income tax rate brackets based on an individual's tax filing status to be implemented for tax year 24. This adoption of graduated income tax rates beginning tax year 23 does not impact the fiscal 25 allowance disparity grant calculation because the fiscal 25 allowance is based on tax year 2022 net income tax amount. However, these will begin impacting the fiscal 26 allowance grant calculations. This complicates the determination of a jurisdiction's per capita tax yield, which is based on a jurisdiction's income tax revenues and its population in that particular tax year. Also, while there is a cap on the grant set at the county's fiscal 2010 grant amount, there is a provision that if an eligible county's grant amount determined by the formula is higher than the county's maximum grant amount, the county is provided a portion of the uncapped amount. And because of this adoption of the graduated income tax rates, this portion of the uncapped amount may vary, which may result in differing grant amounts for the jurisdictions. We request the DBM to comment on how it will address the challenges associated with calculating this formula beginning in fiscal 26 while working with the Office of the Comptroller to obtain the data needed. Page 10 is DLS's recommended action to adopt a committee narrative requesting a report from DBM and the Office of the Comptroller on the impact of the adoption of the new income tax bracket rates on the disparity grant calculation and a plan for how DBM will calculate the disparity grant amounts starting with the fiscal 26 allowance. This is the end of my presentation and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report. And before DBM comes up, I would certainly like if you could expound a little more on the 29, the huge decrease for Prince George's County.
Sir, this is mostly accountable for the calculation. It's based on the formula, and because the Prince George's county's population has decreased in so the population has decreased for Prince County for the calendar year 2022. That has impacted their income tax revenue for that particular year, which is why there has been a decrease in the grant amount.
So if I might, Mr. Chairman, Prince George's County grew almost 100,000 people in the last census. So I'm really not sure where that decrease comes in.
Based on the estimates that I was given, sir, the population has decreased.
I'll speak with DBM when they come up. Thank you,
sir. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much. Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Helene Grady. I'm Secretary of Budget and Management, and Mark Nicole, our Deputy Secretary for Budget and Management, is here with me this afternoon. I want to say that DBM appreciates the analysis put forward by Ms. Rye from DLS. We are here to answer any questions. We did submit written testimony that responds to the one recommendation from DLS that DBM work with the Office of the Comptroller to obtain the data needed to update the methodology for disparity grant calculations now that we have counties with graduated income tax brackets. We do acknowledge that challenge that the adoption of the graduated income tax brackets at the local level could create for this methodology. We would say that we don't expect any issues for fiscal 26 at this time, given the current county income tax rate structures, and the two counties with the graduated rates are not at this point eligible for disparity grant. But we concur with the working recommendation of the office. We concur with the recommendation to work with the Office of the Comptroller on the requested report. We do note that certain components of the formula statute, such as the limit on grant amounts based on county income tax rates, may require a statutory fix rather than an administrative one, but we'll certainly know more on that once we pull together the report.
Great. You wanna tackle Senator Jackson's question?
I'm going to ask Mark if he wants to weigh in a little bit on the calculation for Prince George's County.
Sure. So as the DLS analyst noted, Prince George's County, based on the information that we have, and we shared calculations with DLS staff and sort of checked that. So in Prince George's County had an increase in wealth and a decline in poverty, and the sort of combination together, along with kind of the changes in wealth and population in other counties, is just sort of the way the math worked. We will certainly follow up on where those estimates came from and get back to the committee on where the data came from and maybe some explanation behind that.
So, Mr. Nicole, it wasn't necessarily about population decrease.
It's a combination, right? It's an
It
increase in,
ultimately comes down to the wealth calculation.
correct. But the per resident wealth increased a little bit more because the population declined.
Decreased. Got
Yes.
it. Senator Jackson?
Yes, I will await you getting back to us. As a matter of fact, we'll probably try to set up a meeting. It's not uncommon, Mr. Chair, that every once in a while we have to have a meeting to talk about these disparity grants, because for some reason we seem to be unique every few years or so. So I'd appreciate it if you could get back to us as soon as possible. We'll reach out to your office as well.
We will do that, Senator.
Thank you.
Very good. Other questions for the secretary and the deputy? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Kramer, and I'm here with the Department of Legislative Services, and I'll be presenting the analysis for the State Reserve Fund. The State Reserve Fund provides a means to designate money for future use. As you can see on the cover page chart, the fiscal 2025 allowance decreases by $1.1 billion to just under $310 million in fiscal 2025. This amount reflects proposed actions in the BRFA to repeal the requirement for fiscal 2025 only for the provisions requiring appropriations of the unappropriated fiscal 2023 surplus. The reduction contingent on the BRFA is a $495 million reduction to the rainy day fund, as well as $25 million each to the pension system and the post-retirement health benefits trust fund. DLS is recommending that the General Assembly directly make those reductions and delete the language making the cuts contingent on legislation. You also note that there is $90 million in special funds included in the fiscal 2025 allowance. This represents an appropriation to the dedicated purpose account of funds that are transferred from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. And I'll discuss that in a little more detail later on in this presentation. The large fiscal 2023 amount that you see here included $2.4 billion to the rainy day fund and $1.8 billion to the dedicated purpose account. And I'll discuss some of that fiscal 2023 dedicated purpose account funding later in this analysis. On page 2, the governor's plan includes 2 deficiency appropriations. The first is $30 million in the dedicated purpose account to assist with state center moving costs. This is in addition to $43 million in the dedicated purpose account remaining for this purpose from prior year appropriations. The budget also includes a $10 million deficiency to the catastrophic event account to guard against natural disasters or other catastrophes. The account currently has a $9.4 million balance after a $635,000 transfer to the Department of Labor in October 2023 was used to prepare to administer a loan fund for federal employees in the event of a federal government shutdown. Congress took action and federal appropriations did not lapse at that time. The historic balance of the catastrophic event account is $10 million. And so DLS is recommending reducing the deficiency appropriation by $9.4 million to maintain a $10 million balance. Turning next to page 4, Exhibit 1. As I mentioned, there is no planned appropriation to the rainy day fund. However, there are 2 planned actions to transfer funds from the rainy day fund as shown here in this exhibit. The first would transfer $150 million to the general fund, which would then be used to fund a grant to WMATA via an appropriation in the dedicated purpose account. And then there's also a $96.4 million transfer to the general fund to reflect excess funding that's in the rainy day fund. As seen here, the fiscal 2025 anticipated balance is $2.34 billion. If you turn to Exhibit 2 on page 5, you can see the historic balances in the rainy day fund relative to the estimated general fund revenues. The $2.3 billion estimated balance of the rainy day fund represents 9.4% of general fund revenues. This is higher than the SAC recommendation of at least 8.5% of general fund revenues. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the appropriations to the dedicated purpose account in the governor's budget plan. Some of these items have seen prior funding in the dedicated purpose account. The allowance includes $10 million in funding for end the wait initiatives in Medicaid. That's in addition to $6 million that was provided in fiscal 2024. There's $3 million in funding for rebuilding state government. That's in addition to $2 million that was provided last year. The fiscal 2024 funds were used to conduct a market study of state employee salaries and to conduct a statewide workplace culture survey. The fiscal 2025 funding will be used to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the state workforce and develop plans to improve workplace culture. The fiscal 2025 allowance also includes $2.5 million for apprenticeship roles in state government. DBM is working with the Department of Labor and other agencies to identify positions with high vacancies to develop apprenticeship paths. This is in addition to $25 million that was appropriated in fiscal 2023 for other apprenticeship efforts through the Department of Labor. The mandated dedicated capital grant for WMATA that has in recent years been funded with general funds in the dedicated purpose account is instead funded with general obligation bonds. Instead, as I mentioned earlier, the dedicated purpose account includes $150 million general fund appropriation for an operating grant to WMATA. On to page 7, the dedicated purpose account includes a few new or one-time appropriations. The largest is the $90 million special fund appropriation using funds transferred from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, or SEIF, to implement the Climate Solutions Now Act and the state's climate pollution reduction plan. The BRFA includes a provision authorizing this use of funds. However, the budget bill does not include language making the appropriation contingent on that legislation. So DLS is recommending that language be added. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows the proposed source of those funds transferred from SEIF and the various account balances before and after the proposed transfer. DLS is recommending amending the BRFA to prevent funds from being transferred from the energy assistance account within SEIF and direct that more funds come from the administration account in SEIF. On page 9, there are 3 capital projects that are included in the dedicated purpose account allowance. These include a $30 million contribution toward construction of a public promenade at the Inner Harbor in Baltimore City. $7 million is included for construction of a data science center on the Johns Hopkins Bayview campus. That's in addition to $13 million in GO bonds for this project. DBM has stated that both of these projects would be moved to the DGS budget in a future supplemental budget. $5 million is provided for state center demolition and planning. This is in addition to the $30 million in moving costs that I mentioned earlier. And finally, 2 new operating programs at the Department of Juvenile Services are funded in the dedicated purpose account. That includes $7 million for the Enhanced Services Continuum Initiative and $5 million for the DJS Community Investment Initiative. More info about that can be found in the DJS analysis. And then finally, a couple things typically funded in the dedicated purpose account are not here in this allowance. Funding for food banks has previously been provided in the dedicated purpose account. Those funds are instead provided at DHS, this allowance. And there's no cybersecurity funding. A total of $362 million had been appropriated in prior years for this purpose. The governor is proposing transferring $149.5 million in that amount to the general fund, leaving just under $99 million for this purpose. On page 11, the one key observation I'll discuss, the dedicated purpose account retains about $1 billion in funds appropriated between fiscal 22 and 2024. This is atypical for the account. While funds may remain in the account for up to 4 years beyond the close of the appropriation year, the fund balance has exceeded $100 million only once since 2000 prior to fiscal 2023. The reason for this is due to significant surpluses that the state has seen in recent years, resulting in large amounts of funding being provided for specified purposes. Additionally, in fiscal 2023, the dedicated purpose account was an avenue for the governor to provide funding for agreed upon legislative priorities. Moving on to Exhibit 5 at the bottom of page 11 and continuing on to 12. This exhibit shows the funds that are remaining in the dedicated purpose account by purpose. Many of these are for long-term purposes or projects, such as blueprint funds, which are intended for future costs for the blueprint implementation. Other long-term projects include $100 million for transportation funds for matching federal dollars, the $98 million for cybersecurity that I just mentioned. There also is $73 million total for state center relocation costs, $90 million for state agency facilities renewal. Of that, $25 million is for DNR critical maintenance projects. The BRFA includes a provision to transfer $44 million out of the dedicated purpose account that had been intended for PAYGO projects that you see in this exhibit. These projects are the 2100 Guilford Avenue building in Baltimore, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management headquarters at Camp Frederick, and Conowingo Dam dredging. After these proposed transfers, about $48 million in funds would remain for PAYGO projects in the dedicated purpose account. There are also funds remaining for longer term commitments, including funds to expand autism waivers, support apprenticeship programs in the state, and develop a financial aid system for higher education, which were all expected to require multiple years before funds were exhausted. Finally, agencies reverted $18.7 million to the dedicated purpose account at the close of fiscal 2023. This includes $7.3 million for assisted living facilities and $4.5 million for the LEAP program in MSDE. DLS is recommending BRFA actions to transfer those funds, as well as 2 smaller allocations to the general fund, as they were either one-time COVID aid or for a grant program that has ended. DLS is also asking DBM to comment on the usage of the remainder of dedicated purpose account funds, whether they will be retransferred to their agencies for their original purposes, or if they could be instead transferred to the general fund. DLS's recommendations begin on page 14. Items 1 through 7 are the direct reductions I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, as well as the deletion of contingent language that would not be necessary. Page 15, item 8 would add the language making this transfer of CEF funds contingent on the BRFA. Item 9 is the reduction of the deficiency appropriation to the catastrophic event account. And on page 16, DLS has 2 BRFA recommendations, one to restrict where the CEF funds come from, and the other to transfer unused dedicated purpose account funds to the general fund. With that, I conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for our analyst?
Yeah, I have one quick question. I was pleased to see that they put in $2.5 million for apprenticeships in state agencies. Is there any background on how they intend to use that money you know of?
Yes, the intention is to create apprenticeship programs within state government, actual positions in agencies. I'll have more details next week at the personnel analysis.
Okay.
But that's the plan for the.
But you think it's about creating positions that would be for apprentices coming in?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And we'll have details next week. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon again. I'm Helene Grady, Secretary for Budget and Management, here with Mark Nicole, our Deputy Secretary. We appreciate the thorough analysis put forward by Mr. Kramer from DLS and appreciate his collaboration with us on the analysis. We have submitted written testimony and we are happy to recap here our responses to the DLS recommendations, if that's helpful. The first recommendation by DLS is to reduce the deficiency appropriation by 9.4 million to reflect recent federal budget actions and maintain the catastrophic event account balance at $10 million. DBM respectfully disagrees with the DLS recommendation. We definitely contemplated similar action as we were preparing the governor's allowance and made the intentional decision to include the $9.4 million deficiency. In October 2023, the administration processed Amendment 1524, transferring $635,000 from the catastrophic event account to the Department of Labor to prepare to administer the government shutdown employee assistance loan fund, which was created by the Federal Shutdown Paycheck Protection Act of 2019. The fund provides for no interest loans to civilian employees of the federal government who are required to report to work at a work site located in the state and not being paid because of a full or partial federal government shutdown due to a lapse in appropriations. The remaining balance in the catastrophic event account totaling 9.4 million is designated for transfer to Department of Labor if or when a federal shutdown does occur. And our indications, particularly from our Director of Federal Affairs with the Governor's Office, is that this is still a very active possibility and threat and risk for us to manage. We do understand that as early as March 2024, when the current CRs, as far as I understand, expire, we could be very much facing the next potential shutdown. For this reason, our position is that, we really do believe that as long as this Paycheck Protection Program remains in place, we would like to be able to have in reserve the capital to establish it if and when a federal shutdown occurs. Our sense is that that is, the environment in which we are going to be operating for some period of time. At the same time, we do feel very strongly that the administration requires additional appropriation to deal with other catastrophic events, unanticipated events that can occur and for which we would not have immediate direct appropriation authority to be able to act. We do feel that not keeping that catastrophic event account at the 10 million balance over and above being able to fund the employee paycheck protection program would be really unnecessary risk for the state and the administration, who would need to manage through any unanticipated events with very little appropriation authority to do that unless we have this catastrophic fund at the balance level. The next two recommendations, recommendation 2 and 3 by DLS, DBM concurs with. And then recommendation 4 on page 12, DLS recommends a BRFA amendment transferring the unspent balances within the DPA for several items and ask DBM to brief the committee on the usage of other remaining funds. I'm going to ask Mark Nicole to walk through our update on the status of those various funds.
Sure. So Mark Nicole, Deputy Secretary, DBM. DBM does agree with the bulk of the recommendation for the transfers proposed by the DLS analysts. We would note that we are currently working with MSDE to determine the sort of status of the LEAP funds that had been dedicated for MSDE in 2023. We're a little bit uncertain about kind of whether or not those funds are actually still with the department. So we are investigating that. There were 7 other appropriations in fiscal year 23 that sort of remain. We would propose one of those, the Maryland New Start Act program funds were inadvertently reverted by the Department of Commerce to the general fund at the end of 23. 4, we would propose that the funds stay they're in dedicated purpose account, but we reappropriated to the agencies for the original purposes. And there are 2 of the grants that were made that have very small balances. for the Greater Baltimore Regional Integrated Crisis Center and the Center for Neuroscience of Social Injustice that we would propose reverting to the general fund.
Finally, I think we did want to mention that DBM intends to propose an amendment to strike the transfer of $355,760 from the DPA to the general fund, which was included in error in the governor's allowance.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing today. We will get started at 1:15 and voting.